Welcome to Knowledge for Life, the quest for spirituality in daily living. Each program in this series will look at questions about the spirit.
The real human being is not his or her body, it's the spirit.
Where did it come from, and where does it go when it leaves the body? And why is it here in that body?
Human potential.
We have disconnected ourselves from nature, and nature for me is a very strong aid to rediscovering myself.
The laws of nature.
We know these laws. Our grandmothers knew these laws. We see them every day.
Whatever you are doing, it will come back to you.
Personal responsibility.
You came from a spiritual place and you are to return to that spiritual place. Therefore, everything that you do, think, say, desire must serve that singular purpose.
Dealing with suffering.
We can't always understand why we're going through something, but that doesn't mean that we can't find some meaning to that.
Intuition and the inner voice.
The intuition is a voice that we have to rediscover because it is incredibly powerful.
And the power of thoughts.
It is a fact that our thoughts are energies and that they can influence other people.
And now, join us on a quest.
Welcome to our program, Knowledge for Life, the quest for spirituality in daily living. I'm your host, Carol Rubenstein. Our topic today is business and human potential. Joining us is Mr. Richard Anderson, a vice president with the Andersons, a diversified international agribusiness. Welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Carol.
Most people perceive that business today, especially large corporations, is not really interested in the individual, but rather that they're profit motivated. But you say that the paradigm is shifting. Is this the case?
I believe it is, Carol. Profit is like breathing. Without breathing, there's no life, and without profit, a company can't exist. But it cannot be the purpose for being. When I went to school, to business school some 10 years ago, the dogma then was that you exist as a manager to create value for the shareholder. That was it. And I believe that is changing dramatically. In our company, we focus on three stakeholder groups: the people of the company, the customers, and the communities in which we operate. The shareholder is the fourth of those stakeholders. But the real purpose and focus of the company are the first three. The profit is the outcome of really serving those stakeholders well.
So if profit is not the main motivator anymore in the business world, as you say, what is the main motivation in this new paradigm you're describing?
I think for me and for the people in our company, the primary motivator is to help. We say in our mission statement, we want to help each other develop. Well, what does that mean? It means to help the people of the company develop themselves as people.
And how does a business contribute to a person developing themselves?
Well, I think it's incumbent on the management to create the avenues, the opportunities, the tools, the environment that allows a person to take action, to grow and develop. But ultimately, a person has to make that decision for him or herself. Development requires personal effort. It requires taking action, utilizing your free will to make decisions, taking risks, stepping out of where your comfort zone is, and creating movement in your own life and therefore within the life of the business. No one can force that to happen, but a company can certainly reward that, create incentives for that to happen, give the tools, make the tools available for that to happen. But ultimately it's an individual decision that a person makes to grow and develop him or herself.
And does it really work in the business world for a person to be developing their own personal style or inner way of being?
Well, I think if there is a new paradigm emerging in business, it is a paradigm that recognizes the tremendous creative potential of people. And I think years ago we didn't necessarily recognize that. People were cogs in a machine, if you will. They were there to do a specific job, to do the job well and go home. And now I think the focus is on that creative potential. And there's a growing awareness that people bring a lot more to the table in business than we could have imagined before. But in order to access that, there must be movement, there must be dynamism within the company and the people of the company. And so that's how a person within a company can certainly be much more successful, if you will, than many years ago, because I think the opportunities for growth in any direction are more and more available.
And this creative nature that you're talking about an employee needing to have an opportunity to express, how does the individual manifest this creative side more in the business place?
I think, as I said, we as management can make everything available for that to happen. For example, training. We have a lot of training programs that are not mandatory. A person has to make a decision to go down that road and to journey into new areas and develop new vistas for activity. That's one way. Another way is simply by taking the step to speak up and to make your views heard. We've all been in meetings where something wells up from your inner being, from your intuition, something that you feel is important. And more, there's a need to put that on the table, to express those views, to make them known, and not to sit quietly and let it pass. And so there's much more engagement in business today, much more involvement of everybody in the process. And ultimately this creates much more effective products and better success and interestingly, more profit, which is really the outcome of that process.
It sounds to me, though, that the kind of person you're describing who would be a part of this new paradigm is somebody who is much more consciously aware of their inner life. Do you think that that's true?
You cannot move and grow without developing your inner being. I mean, that's really what it's all about. We are more than our physical makeup. We are spiritual beings. And this journey I'm talking about, whether it's in the business world or whether it's in your private life, is all about developing your inner being and becoming more and more conscious of who that person really is and what that person's capabilities are, inherent and given to each of us as a gift. This is a process. It's a process of awakening, of becoming conscious.
And why do you think then, at this particular point in history, more people are doing that and it's then creating this new paradigm?
Carol, there is an awakening going on, not only in business. I mean, business is simply a place where it's manifesting. You can go into any other discipline, medicine, education, even government and politics, and there is a new awakening as to the nature of people, as to the nature of how the world really works. Why is it happening now? I think we're going into a new era, and there is a lot of movement right now in the world, and it really transcends a business or any other enterprise. It is happening all around us.
I know that some of your business activities with the Andersons will take you to various places around the world. Do you experience that this new paradigm shift that you see happening here in the United States is also in evidence in other cultures throughout the world?
I think, Carol, it's happening to humanity around the world. It's most dramatic, I think, in the Western world because the Western paradigm is a very materialistic paradigm, the old paradigm. The Eastern world had not gotten nearly as caught up in that as the Western world. So this shift, this awareness of spirit, this awareness of a fundamentally different dynamic in the world is most dramatic in the Western world, and I think ironically is manifesting there first. Because what we're finding is the paradigm that we've built the Western world on doesn't work very well, doesn't work for people very well.
And so how does a person who's a part of the old paradigm, who's a part of this materialistic world, how do they break out of those old habits?
Well, if the company is not providing those opportunities, it's much more difficult. I said that the management has a job, and that is to have this awareness and to provide the avenues for personal growth. So if you're in a company that does not espouse that, you got a tougher row to hoe than someone working in an organization where those avenues are freely provided. But nonetheless, ultimately, it's a personal decision to create movement in your own life. And that's not something that you have to wait for anyone else to provide. As soon as you make that decision, you will find yourself on a journey of discovery. And that journey may lead you right out of the company that you're in today into another organization that can facilitate your growth and allow you the avenues of expression and creativity that you really are looking for.
Mr. Anderson, after a short break, I'd like to come back to this idea of personal discovery so that we could explore that a little further. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our program, Knowledge for Life. Our guest today is Mr. Richard Anderson. Our topic is business and human potential. Mr. Anderson, right before our short break, you were talking about the need for employees to go on a personal journey, one of personal discovery. Could you share a little bit more with us, your thoughts about that?
The personal discovery I think I was talking about was discovering more about our inner being, our inner nature. And one of the things that's unfortunately happened in our Western culture over the last 100 years is we have divorced ourselves from the natural world. We've created cities, some people call them concrete canyons where very little grows. We've developed automobiles and air conditioning, and a person can literally live in an encapsulated artificial environment from morning to night and never go out of doors. Unfortunately, a lot of people live this way, and what has happened is we have disconnected ourselves from nature, and nature for me is a very strong aid to rediscovering myself. In nature you see a world of harmony, a world that manifests life in a very awakening way. And for me, just to reconnect with nature has done a lot to bring my awareness of myself back and what my inner core of my being is really all about. It's difficult in this day and age to do that. You can plant a garden, something as simple as that, and spend time watching plants grow your own food. At our house, we raise chickens, and a lot of the food that we eat, we raise in the backyard. It's a simple thing, but there's an incredible wonder that can develop within a person just by looking at a flower. There's a lot there to be had that unfortunately, we've thrown a lot of that away in our Western culture. So one of the things that I would advocate, if you want to develop your abilities, your innate abilities, is get reconnected with nature.
So what you're saying is that in order to be a part of this new paradigm that's emerging in the business world, a person has to do more than just change the way they live at work. You're saying that it's a whole life thing. Is that true?
Yeah, I think, Carol, it's about creating inner movement. It's about developing that most essential part of our being, and that will translate into the work world. But if it's not happening at home, if it's not really a part of your whole life, it won't happen in the workplace either.
When I hear you use the words inner being, it makes me think of the words inner voice. Are these two things connected?
Definitely. Another word we could use is spirit. Our inner being is spirit. It is spiritual, and there is a voice. Some call it intuition. The voice of the spirit of our inner being is intuition, as opposed to our intellect, our conscious mind, which we focus a lot on now in our education and even in our enterprises and business and elsewhere. We focus more on the intellect, but the intuition is a voice that we have to rediscover, because it is incredibly powerful to understand and to know what decisions ought to be made when, even in a business environment. One of the things that you find in business is you never have enough information. You're always required to make decisions without enough information that would satisfy the intellect. But the intuition is always there. And the people who are really successful have developed strong intuitions. They know. We use the phrase gut feel. I have a gut feel for what's happening and why it's happening. I don't have all the data, not in an intellectual sense, but you have a lot more data at that intuitive sense.
And what exactly is the difference between the intellect and the intuition? How do we distinguish between the two?
Well, the intellect is our day consciousness. It's that part of our brain we use for rational thought. The intuition is something that wells up deep within us. It's where premonitions come from. It's where our conscience comes from. The thinking mind is something we hone and train in school and with courses and so forth. But the intuitive faculty is an innate part of our spiritual being that we haven't paid a lot of attention to in our education. We haven't even focused on developing that faculty. But creative people naturally do that, have developed that. And it's that capability that they utilize the most. And I find in business that the leaders and even the people who are working within the grassroots portion of the company, those who really grow and develop are using that intuitive faculty more and more.
Could you share with us from your own personal experience in your daily life as a businessman, how have you used your intuition and how has it made a difference?
Well, I can share an experience I'm having right now. We're in the process of trying to decide whether to buy another company. And it's one of those things where you don't have all the data. And for me, I'm relying on a lot of other signals, a lot of other stimuli, and ultimately my intuition that is saying, move forward.
I find that really interesting what you're talking about, because it really takes us to the heart of the issue here, which is how to spiritualize our daily lives. And basically what you're saying is that the intuition is one of the tools of our inner voice that we have to develop our spirits and this part of our inner life. And it makes me think of something that you said earlier about conscience and how the inner voice is the tool for the conscience. And I'm thinking about business ethics then. Do you think that business ethics are at a higher level now with this new paradigm that you're describing?
I think it goes without saying that when we turn the focus from profit to helping people develop, in that transition, integrity, honesty, those values come to the fore, because people cannot develop without those fundamental values being in place. Business ethics, doing the right thing is good business. It always will be. It always has been. Without that perspective, you're in a short-term, quick fix, make money fast scenario.
What if there's a person in the audience today who's in the business world, or perhaps maybe they're not in the business world as an employee, but they're a consumer, but they want to develop some of these attributes about the inner life that you're describing? How would a person go about starting? Where would they turn?
I think you have to start with yourself, and as I said, it doesn't have to be in the business setting. I think one of the unfortunate things about the world we've created is we've created such a haste, such a pace, such a frenzied level of activity that we rarely get the time to take time out to be quiet. And I think it's so important to develop that part of, that side of yourself that is within, that we call the inner being. It doesn't happen on the treadmill. It doesn't happen rushing to and from work. For me, it happens at those quiet moments where you take the time to pray, you take the time to read spiritual material, and you take the time to reflect. And in that process, something awakens within you, something begins to grow and develop, and with repeated effort, with repeated focus and a repeated commitment to take that time and to invest in that activity, something begins to happen, and you begin to rediscover that part of your being that has been there all along.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for sharing those enlightening ideas about how we can spiritualize our daily lives and how we can, each of us as individuals, develop our human potential in the workplace and beyond. Thank you for joining us.
This has been Knowledge for Life. The quest for spirituality in daily living. Welcome to Knowledge for Life, the quest for spirituality in daily living. Each program in this series will look at questions about the spirit.
The real human being is not his or her body, it's the spirit.
Where did it come from, and where does it go when it leaves the body? And why is it here in that body?
Human potential.
We have disconnected ourselves from nature, and nature for me is a very strong aid to rediscovering myself.
The laws of nature.
We know these laws. Our grandmothers knew these laws. We see them every day.
Whatever you are doing, it will come back to you.
Personal responsibility.
You came from a spiritual place and you are to return to that spiritual place. Therefore, everything that you do, think, say, desire must serve that singular purpose.
Dealing with suffering.
We can't always understand why we're going through something, but that doesn't mean that we can't find some meaning to that.
Intuition and the inner voice.
The intuition is a voice that we have to rediscover because it is incredibly powerful.
And the power of thoughts.
It is a fact that our thoughts are energies and that they can influence other people.
And now, join us on a quest.
We all know that most news is bad news, but there are a lot of issues and challenges in the world out there. But I would challenge you today that there is a very good reason to be optimistic about the future, in spite of everything that we're bombarded with every day. And the reason for my optimism has little to do with the institutions we've created over hundreds of years. It has much more to do with the fact that at the present time, we're undergoing, as a world, a fundamental shift in our awareness of how the world works. This shift is happening in business, it's happening in medicine, it's happening in education. And what I want to share with you today is a little bit about what that really means and what it implies for you, especially in the business world. A lot of people have characterized this as a paradigm shift, and I know that word has been overused and gotten a lot of play, paradigm, but I'd like to use it, and I'd like to delve into it a little bit deeper today and talk about what this really means. What is a paradigm shift? And let's start with just a definition. What is a paradigm? A paradigm is a set of rules or beliefs that attempts to explain how the world works. It's a theory. And why is that important? What difference does it make? Two reasons, two things I'd like you to consider. First of all, beliefs are powerful perceptive filters. What I mean by that is if you believe something very strongly, or you have a very strong belief about how something is or works, you will tend to see it that way. And you will tend to not see other evidence to the contrary. So beliefs are perceptual filters. What you choose to believe, how you choose to believe, actually affects how you perceive the world. Dr. Wayne Dyer, who has written a lot of books, in one of his books he says, you will see it when you believe it. Instead of you will believe it when you see it, he's turned it around and said, you will see it when you believe it. And this gets at the root of what I'm talking about. So paradigms and belief systems are very powerful. And the other thought that I want to leave you with at the very beginning here is that it's really through our thoughts that we create the world. Anything that you've ever created, if you really think about it, you created it in your mind. It first started with a thought, actually with a picture. I happen to be a woodworker. That's my avocation. That's what I do after work. And whenever I start the process of building something, I have to sit and think, what does it look like? Create an image, it's a picture. And then a few scratches on paper, and then some dimensions, and little by little it becomes manifest. And it's a wonderful process. But what I'm saying is that the world we have in front of us today, the world that's out there, is really the result of an underlying belief structure that has been manifest. And everything we see can be traced to a way of thinking and believing about the world. And what I want to talk about today is that paradigm that we're shifting from, that has created the world we live in today, and we're going into a new future. Let's start with science, and let's talk about the old paradigm and what are we moving towards. Newton was the father of what many are now calling the materialistic, mechanistic view of the world. Newton's laws upon which most of our world is built, most of the physical engineered world that we live in, those few laws that were so clear and pristine. And in fact, I went through engineering 20 years ago when I was in your position. Those laws were very powerful 300-400 years ago. Force equals mass times acceleration. The law of inertia, very fundamental, simple ideas. What happened is we took those laws and we learned how to manipulate matter and create machines and create technology. And it was very, very powerful. But in the process, we bought into a concept of the world that is really, it's about matter. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. The scientific method is about measuring discrete parts, discrete materials. And so we've created a world that is very material oriented. And what has happened in the process of trying to understand that world, with that framework, the notion came about to get to the root of matter. Let's find the most basic building block in matter. So physicists and scientists started dissecting and cutting matter apart to find that most basic elemental particle. It was a particle, by the way. That's what they were looking for. Then once you understood what that basic particle was, you could build up and understand everything else. Well, we now know that it never happened. The further physicists studied and bored into the atom, what they found was not matter. What they found was energy. What they found were electromagnetic waves. What they found were particles that sometimes behave like particles, and then the next moment they look like waves. It was a whole new world that didn't fit into this old way of thinking. So now we have quantum physics. And quantum physics brings out some fundamentally different concepts about how the world works. For example, matter is more an illusion than a reality. The underlying reality is what you don't see. If you look at a material substance, you know that 99.99% of that is space. We now know that through quantum physics. We also know that everything is interconnected. There are no discrete parts. If you push here, it moves something here and ultimately affects everything. You can't study something in isolation. Another phenomenon they've discovered as they look more deeply is that just the act of observing a phenomenon changes it. So there's an interaction between the observer and what we thought was an objective phenomenon all of a sudden is different. But it's also happening, it's not only in science, it's happening all around us. If you think about medicine, I could contrast the old medical model, which we're all very familiar with. It's the model of pills and prescriptions and shots and antibiotics. And this is a model which treats, the physical body. It really treats symptoms. It says you have a cold, take this. You have an infection, take this. And you have a headache or you have migraine, take this, okay? It's treating the part. It's focusing on the symptom in many cases bringing some respite, but not treating the underlying cause of the problem. The new medical model is much more rooted in what is the cause, the underlying cause of the problem, of the symptom. And this model contends in a very similar way to quantum physics that the underlying cause is non-material. It's not physical. It happens to manifest physically, but the causes are not physical. So if you really want to get at solutions, you have to deal in a world that is non-physical. For example, thoughts. So when you're angry, your blood chemistry changes dramatically. When you're happy, actual physiological changes happen in your system. So now we begin to see the connection between thoughts and physiology. And that thinking part of us, that non-material part of us, is what this new medical model is really going after. If you study homeopathy at all, it's an energy system that treats us at a level of energy that ultimately has physical manifestations. So you see the parallel, though, between the quantum physics and the Newtonian model. Now in medicine, you see the same kind of parallel coming in. Well, let's shift to business, because that's where I live and that's where I work. And so what's happening in the business world along the same lines? If in fact this is a shift that transcends any of these disciplines, it's really a shift in awareness. I want to introduce you to a company called Johnsonville. How many here have had Johnsonville sausage? It's pretty much everywhere in the country, and it's kind of the top quality sausage. This is a sausage company, all right? What better place to look for a fundamental paradigm shift in business than a sausage factory? Ralph Strayer, who is the CEO, that stands for Chief Executive Officer, the top guy, the top person at Johnsonville. He actually bought the company. And when he bought it, the company was doing fine. I mean, they were making money, they were making sausage, they were cranking it out, and people came to work, punched in, went home, and everything was okay. No major problems, weren't going bankrupt or anything like that. But Ralph was kind of a self-proclaimed philosopher. And he looked at the people coming and going from work every day, and he didn't like what he saw. I mean, he saw people just kind of putting in their time, get me through the 8 hours so I can go home and do what I really want to do. I mean, they weren't engaged in the process. But Ralph really believed that what work is about and what companies are about is letting people grow and develop, letting them become creative, become and manifest their ultimate potential through the work environment, through the work setting. So he decided that I'm going to change this company in a fundamental way. I'm not going to do it the way we've always done it, which is kind of a hierarchical pyramid where the top person makes the ultimate decisions, and then the next level of lieutenants gets the marching orders and then takes that down to the shop floor and instructs the crew leaders and so forth to do X, Y, Z and just implement it, just do it. So he decided to change a lot of things in the company. He changed the training program, and he told his people, look, if you want to advance, I'm going to create opportunity for you through training, through accounting. For example, a person working on the line making sausage could go in their free time and take accounting, learn basic accounting concepts, budgeting concepts, for example. If people wanted to get involved in more work layout and process, he created the opportunity for them to get trained in that. And then he went a little step further. He said, I'm going to incentivize you to do this. You know, raises were based more on a demonstrated interest in moving and growing and developing and changing positions. I think for me and for the people in our company, the primary motivator is to help. We say in our mission statement, we want to help each other develop. Well, what does that mean? It means to help the people of the company develop themselves as people. That's the ultimate purpose, probably the number one purpose that we exist for, to take the employees of the company and give them the opportunity to develop themselves in whatever way they choose to develop themselves. But ultimately, a person has to make that decision for him or herself. Development requires personal effort. It requires taking action, utilizing your free will to make decisions, taking risks, stepping out of where your comfort zone is, and creating movement in your own life and therefore within the life of the business. No one can force that to happen, but a company can certainly reward that, create incentives for that to happen, give the tools, make the tools available for that to happen. But ultimately, it's an individual decision that a person makes to grow and develop him or herself. Then he did something that was probably the most difficult for the organization to deal with, and he told his middle managers, you know, the people who kind of ruled the roost in the old paradigm, he said, you know, your job is not anymore to tell everybody what to do. Your job is to train people so they can do it themselves. And these folks got a little nervous because all of a sudden the job description changed pretty dramatically. And they started thinking, well, if I train them to do it so they know how to do it, well, where does that leave me? All of a sudden I'm not needed. I'm teaching myself out of a job. So they went through all that tension, and some of those folks left. They said, this is not for me. This is not my concept of what my job is. But a lot of folks stayed. And what happened is, lo and behold, the more they trained people, the more movement and creativity bubbled up from the bottom. This company took off, growing at a phenomenal rate. Within 10 years, their output was more than 20 times what it was 10 years earlier. But Ralph himself admitted that it was a 10-year process from the moment he said, this is not what it's about, I don't like what I see, in spite of the fact that we're making money, to when he really got people shifted over to a new way of thinking was 10 years in the making. Well, I think if there's a new paradigm emerging in business, it is a paradigm that recognizes the tremendous creative potential of people. And I think years ago we didn't necessarily recognize that. People were cogs in a machine, if you will. They were there to do a specific job, to do the job well and go home. And now I think the focus is on that creative potential. And there's a growing awareness that people bring a lot more to the table in business than we could have imagined before. But in order to access that, there must be movement, there must be dynamism within the company and the people of the company. And so that's how a person within a company can certainly be much more successful, if you will, than many years ago, because I think the opportunities for growth in any direction are more and more available. So that's where I see business going. And just to kind of capsulize this from what we were just talking about, if we think about organizations, and let's call them in the old paradigm, and not that all of these are gone, by the way. There are a lot of companies out there that are still more in this camp than in this camp. But these changes are happening right now as we speak in business. In the old way of thinking, you tended to have discrete departments, like you had the accounting department. And if you were in accounting, that's what you did. They didn't want you thinking about production. They didn't want you thinking about marketing or new products. I mean, you might have this brilliant idea sitting there doing your cost accounting, but that'll never see the light of day because you're working in accounting. And our job is to crank these numbers and get them right. Now, it's all about, hey, this is one whole system. And there's intelligence in every nook and cranny of this organization. And if it happens to be in accounting that the most brilliant idea comes forth, we want to somehow capture that. I mean, we don't want to let that go. So how do you create a system that encourages people to think outside the box, to do more, and be creative? That's what's going on here. There's a tendency here to want to optimize the parts. We're going to make the best accounting department that ever existed, you know. But the problem is there's like a wall between accounting and marketing. Here it's much more focused on the whole thing. It's not about the parts. It's about the whole. And remember the Newtonian versus quantum physics model. The Newtonian was, what's the basic unit of matter? What is a little piece we can identify? Over here, it's a recognition. This is one whole system. You can't split it into pieces. Decisions tend to be top-down, very autocratic. One person or a group of people making the decisions, everybody else following orders. Here, all of a sudden, you get decisions being made at all levels of the organization. If you're looking at training, the shift happening here is the old model would say, you know, get trained in your specialty. If you're an engineer, go get trained in engineering. Go get trained in the latest and greatest techniques. If you're in accounting, you know, get trained there. Here, there's a lot more cross-functional training. Get the marketing people to go get trained in sales. Get the salespeople to go work in the shop for about 2 months and learn what it takes to make the product. So there's a lot more of this going on. It's connecting all the pieces, all the parts. People here tend to be static. That's what Ralph Strayer was objecting to. There was no movement. There was no excitement. Here you have a dynamic, creative, moving environment. In our company, we have most of the layout in the offices are partitions, and we're forever breaking down those partitions and moving them around. You know, it's just a constant, it's like a never-ending movement within the organization because people keep moving and changing. They don't sit in the same spot very long. And that's the way it ought to be. People are meant to move. This tends to be inflexible. There's one way to do it. It's the way we've always done it. Can't move very fast. Can't adjust to changes in the market very well. This one is much more flexible. An idea percolates up from somewhere in the organization. Somehow it gets aired, and all of a sudden you're moving on it. Very flexible, very dynamic. Here, economies of scale was a fundamental dogma that drove much of our view of the world today. The bigger it is, the better. The bigger the organization, the better. Bigger the company, the better. General Motors, you know, the bigger you are, the stronger you are. Well, we're seeing evidence every day that that is not the case. Now we talk about diseconomies of scale. The smaller the organization, the more people can be involved in decision making, feel like they're really a part of moving that organization, the more effective we can be. And now with technology, with the internet, and you folks are all way ahead of the game there, having a network on campus, technology is driving this too and making this a real opportunity at the present time. This basic shift in awareness is happening at a lot of levels, and the real crux of it is that the extent to which the paradigm or belief structure that you're operating under, the extent to which that really meshes with the way the world is, the greater that mesh and connection is, the more effective and powerful that model is. So this model is much more powerful than this model. And the reason is because this model, this way of thinking, aligns with the way the world works and aligns with the way people really are. I mean, people are creative. They were made that way. Sometimes you wouldn't know it today because we've buried a lot of that. Even at a very early age, we learn to not be creative. We learn to keep within the lines and to do it just this way. But the new model is lining up with much more the way the world works. I mentioned earlier, though, that a lot of companies are still over here. This is not an easy transition to make. You've probably heard of TQM, Total Quality Management. A lot of companies have tried that and tried to make this change because they see, they can see the power in the results. But to get from here to there, Ralph Strayer took 10 years. It was not a quick fix. So if you read the business literature that's out there, you'll find reams of articles about companies who tried total quality management or who tried any number of representations of this new paradigm, and in 6 months they quit. It didn't work. We're going to go back to the old way, the old tried and true. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The work that goes on in making this transition, both at the top of the organization and at the very bottom, is really inner work. It's soul work. I mean, to get people who for 20 or 30 years have been coming to work and punching a clock and working 8 hours just doing what they're told, all of a sudden you're going to say, no, I don't want you to do that anymore. I want you to use your innate, inherent creativity. I want you to grow and develop. I want you to become something more. I want to train you in this other discipline over here. Well, not everybody likes to do that. Sometimes it's easier just to continue in the old, what's comfortable. It's not easy to move and to grow and develop. So there is resistance at that level. I talked about the middle management. Hey, wait a minute. My power's going away. I have this position of power, and now you're telling me I'm a teacher. I'm a trainer. I don't think I like that. And then at the top of the organization, you have this fear of anarchy. What is going to happen if we get all these people cranked up and excited to do their own finger painting? What's going to happen? How are we going to control all that energy? And there's this fear and this control mentality comes out. And so at each level of an organization, to go from here to here involves some deep convictions about what life is all about, what people are all about, and how the world works. I'd like to kind of simplify what I think this is all about, and it's about people working in systems okay? So the new business model is all about people working more effectively in systems. So the operative words are people and systems. If we're going to move our organizations in that direction and really make that transition that a lot of companies are having difficulty making, we have to understand people better. What is a person? What is a human being? What makes a person tick? What's at the core of being human? I mean, if we don't engage in that conversation, how do we talk about moving people from that clock punching mentality to a much more dynamic, moving mentality? If we can't engage in that conversation, it's very difficult to begin this transition. And then the other word, systems, this gets at this concept of everything is interconnected. Everything is linked together. There are no discrete parts. If you organize your company into little departments, you're in for big trouble. What is a system and how does it work? And I'd like to introduce you to a work that I ran into 20 years ago, actually in college, a work called In the Light of Truth. And it's a work that explains what I would describe as a working paradigm of the world, how the world really works. It's an exhaustive work that to this day has absolutely fascinated me with the perception and depth of the insights on these kinds of issues. And the reason I share that with you is it's from that awareness and from that place that when I go into the work world and deal with these kinds of issues, that there's a basis for understanding these things. Let me be a little more specific, and let's talk about people. You know, what is a human being? I don't know what your religious persuasion is. It really doesn't matter whether you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or nothing at all. Everyone has some conceptualization of what it means to be a human being. And some people believe that, hey, it's just a 50, 60-year stint. When I die, I'm gone. That's the end of it. It's your physical body. That's it. A lot of people think that way. On the other hand, there are those who believe that this is just a very short part of our total existence. Okay? This book I told you about, In the Light of Truth, reveals a world of which this plane is only a very small part of, and our presence here is just a flash in our existence. If you think about 70 years in the concept of even the existence of the earth, it's just a brief moment. And it explains a reality that we have actually existed for thousands and thousands of years and will exist for thousands of years into the future. So our presence here is a moment in time, if you will. And in fact, what we really are is spiritual in nature. You go back to that medical model I talked about. Where does disease really come from? It comes from some other place. It manifests physically, but there's another reality that's very operative. And we are at our core, we are spiritual beings that happen to be here at the moment, and we're here by virtue of being born and having a physical body. So everything